In the shadow of a temple that barely resembled the grandeur of Solomon's sanctuary, a people stood, their spirits as weathered as the stones of their rebuilt edifice. The Babylonian exile had left deep scars, and though they had returned to Jerusalem, the land of their forefathers, the triumph they had envisioned was a far cry from the reality they faced. This was not the Israel of David and Solomon, a nation feared and respected by its neighbors. Instead, it was a small, impoverished province within the vast Persian Empire, a place where the only battles fought were those of the spirit. The Psalms, the songs and prayers that filled this modest temple, were a reflection of a people who had come to terms with a new reality. The prophets of old had spoken of a nation's collective guilt, a people who had strayed from the path of righteousness and faced divine retribution. But now, as the returned exiles gathered to worship, the focus had shifted. The Psalms were no longer about a nation's sins. They were about individual struggles, personal triumphs, and the intimate relationship between the individual and God. The prophets had painted a picture of a God who was a warrior, a deity who fought on behalf of his chosen people, bringing down mighty empires and delivering Israel from its enemies. But the God of the Psalms was different. He was a God of mercy, a God who listened to the cries of the oppressed and the afflicted. The Psalms captured a moment in history when the collective had given way to the personal, when the nation's story became the stories of its individuals. One of the most striking aspects of the Psalms is their raw honesty. The psalmists did not shy away from expressing their doubts, their fears, and their moments of despair. They cried out to God in the depths of their pain, asking for deliverance, for justice, and for a sign that God had not forgotten them. In Psalm 130, the psalmist speaks from the depths of his soul, calling out to God in a plea for mercy. Out of the depths I call you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. These words reflect a deep sense of vulnerability, a recognition that the psalmist's only hope lies in the mercy of God. The God of the Psalms is not a distant, unapproachable deity. He is a God who is close, who hears the cries of his people, and who is willing to intervene in their lives. This God is not just a judge, but also a father, a shepherd, and a friend. The Psalms also reveal a profound shift in the way the Israelites understood their relationship with God. The prophets had spoken of a covenant, a binding agreement between God and his people. But the terms of this covenant were often presented in stark, black and white terms. If the people obeyed, they would be blessed. If they disobeyed, they would be punished. The Psalms, however, introduce a more nuanced understanding of this relationship. The psalmists speak of a God who is not just a judge, but also a teacher, a guide, and a source of wisdom. In Psalm 119, the longest chapter in the entire Bible, the psalmist celebrates the law of God, not as a burdensome set of rules, but as a source of joy and enlightenment. How sweet are your words to my taste, sweeter than honey to my mouth. I gain understanding from your precepts. Therefore I hate every wrong path. For the psalmist, the law is not a means to earn God's favor, but a gift from a loving God, a way to draw closer to him and to understand his will. This shift in perspective reflects a deeper, more personal relationship between the individual and God. The law is no longer a set of external commands, but a way of life, a path that leads to a closer relationship with God. The Psalms also reveal a new emphasis on the individual. While the prophets had often spoken of the nation as a whole, the psalmists focused on the experiences and struggles of individual people. This shift is evident in the way the psalmists speak of their enemies. In many of the Psalms, the enemies are not foreign nations or powerful empires, but personal foes. Individuals who have wronged the psalmist and caused them suffering. In Psalm 56, for example, the psalmist speaks of his enemies as those who have seized him and brought him low. In my distress I called to the Lord, I cried to my God for help. From his temple he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. The psalmist's enemies are not just physical threats, but also moral and spiritual challenges. They represent the temptations and trials that each individual must face in their journey of faith. The Psalms speak of a God who is not just a protector against external threats, but also a guide through the inner struggles of the human heart. This focus on the individual is also reflected in the way the psalmists speak of their own sin and guilt. While the prophets had often spoken of the nation's collective sin, the psalmists are more introspective, more aware of their own failings. In Psalm 51, the psalmist David, after his sin with Bathsheba, cries out to God in a moment of deep repentance. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion blot out my transgressions. The psalmist recognizes that his sin is not just a matter of breaking a law, but a violation of his relationship with God. He seeks not just forgiveness, but a restoration of that relationship, a renewal of his spirit. This deep sense of personal responsibility and the desire for spiritual renewal is a hallmark of the Psalms. The Psalms also reflect a new understanding of God's presence in the world. While the prophets had often spoken of God as a distant, transcendent being who acted through historical events, the psalmists speak of a God who is intimately involved in the lives of his people. In Psalm 139, the psalmist marvels at God's omniscience and omnipresence. You created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. For the psalmist, God is not just a creator but a sustainer, a God who is present in every moment of life, from the moment of conception to the moment of death. This understanding of God's presence brings a sense of comfort and security, even in the midst of trials and suffering. The Psalms also reveal a deep sense of hope and trust in God. While the prophets had often spoken of a distant future, a time when God would bring about a great restoration, the psalmists speak of a God who is present and active in the present. In Psalm 23, the psalmist speaks of God as a shepherd who guides and protects his people. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. The psalmist finds peace and security in the presence of God. Even in the midst of danger and uncertainty, this trust in God is not blind, but is based on a deep understanding of God's character and a personal experience of His faithfulness. The Psalms also reflect a deep sense of community, while the focus is often on the individual. The Psalms are also a collection of songs and prayers that were meant to be sung and recited by the community. In Psalm 133, the psalmist celebrates the unity and harmony that can exist among God's people. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows His blessing, even life forevermore. The psalmist recognizes that the presence of God is not just a personal experience, but a communal one. The unity and harmony of the community are a reflection of God's presence and a source of blessing and life. In conclusion, the Psalms capture a moment in history when the Israelites were navigating a new reality. A reality marked by personal struggles, individual guilt, and a deep, intimate relationship with God. The Psalms are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring presence of God in the lives of His people. They remind us that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope, and that God is always near, ready to hear our cries and to guide us on our journey of faith.